we have a time frame? Yes. Mr. Morton, what period of time were you dealing drugs in Binghamton approximately? From about '08 to 2011. Mr. Morton, do you remember when during your time in Binghamton that you committed those robberies? One time was like in the wintertime, and the other time was like fall. It was nice out. How far apart were they? Maybe a few months apart. Do you remember when those robberies were in relation to the times that you were arrested in Binghamton? After the first time, 3 times in Binghamton. So maybe one after the first time and, yeah, like both of them, after the first time and before the second time. So between the first and the second arrest in Binghamton, is that when these 2 robberies took place? Yes, sir. Who were you with for those robberies? Streets. Who were you robbing? We robbed drug dealers. Starting with the first one, can you explain what happened? So, the first one, I had a crack spot on Thorpe. So we went there with some guys in there, and me and Streets robbed them. We took them. Took their stuff. Is Thorpe the name of a street? Yes, ma'am. And you said a crack spot. What does that mean? It was somewhere where they sell drugs out of. Who had a gun on that day? Streets had a gun that day. And what, if anything, did you and Streets take? I believe we took money. Do you remember how much? No, I don't remember exactly. Ballpark, how much? A few thousand. Turning to the second Binghamton robbery, how did that take place? So, it was a guy named Don. He was selling drugs out there. And we seen him coming out of a house. Me and Streets, we jumped out of the car and we pulled out the guns on them and we took all their money. Who had guns that day? Both of us did. How much money did you take? Close to 10,000. Mr. Morton, all told, how long have you been in the prison in the New York State system? Altogether, with all my bids, about 15 and some change years. During that time, did you become familiar with the New York State Corrections rules for inmates? Yes. How did you come to be familiar with them? Through reading the guideline book that they give you, the rule book they give you, through trials and tribulations with the police that I had. Were there consequences for breaking the rules in prison? Yes. What kinds of consequences? You could be sent to the box. You could get your property taken for days. You can lose loss of phones, loss of rec. What's the box? That's like segregation. That's somewhere you go where you're supposed to be in your cell. Have you also spent time in the custody of New York City Correction inside Rikers Island? Yes, I have. Based on your time in custody in the States and at Rikers, have you ever gotten special privileges while you were in custody? Yes. What kind of special privileges? Okay, so I was allowed to stay out of my cell for hours on end. I was allowed to, have special moments with my wife on visit. What do you mean? I was allowed to have sex with her on the visit. What did you do for the guards in exchange for those special privileges? So we just kept order inside the dorms. So we make everybody else lock in, make everybody clean, make sure that they're not disrespecting the officers. When you say everybody, do you mean the other inmates? Everybody who wasn't blood. Why were you able to exercise control over those bloods? Because I had made a name for myself at the time, and that's it. I just had a little reputation. What do you mean you made a name for yourself? Okay, so I was coming up, so a lot of people knew me. So I was getting drugs. So I was able to be around a lot of different types of other gang members. Yes or no? Are you aware of other Bloodhound Brim members who have gotten special privileges in prison? Yes. How are you aware of that? Some of them I've been around, and some of them you hear from other gang members. Who are you aware of getting special privileges in prison? Objection, Your Honor. Grounds? Your Honor, it's not the kind of statement that's, can't hear you. It's hearsay. Okay, well, yeah. I will sustain the objection based on foundation. Mr. Morton, how are you aware of other members getting special privileges? Just from other gang members, telling me or, being around. Just being in there, seeing it. What do you mean by being around and seeing it? May I see the lawyers at sidebar for just a minute? Mr. Morton, I think you testified yesterday that you communicated with Lau when he was in prison. Yes. How did you communicate with him? I used to go up there to go see him. Up where? To Southport. Okay. Any other ways you communicated with him when he was in Southport? No. Is there a correctional facility in Southport, a prison? Yeah, that's the name of it. Yes. Your Honor, we'd ask for a time frame. This was around the beginning of 2011. Mr. Morton, you testified that you became blood while you were in prison. Were gangs allowed by New York State prison rules? No. Can you get in trouble for gang activity in prison? Yes. What would happen if guards became aware of someone being in a gang? Objection! Objection. Sustained. Mr. Morton, when you're in prison, is it possible to talk to someone who isn't in your unit? Yes. How? You could write on a small piece of paper and, tie it to the strings and keep throwing it until you get to the person's cells you needed to get to. You can put it in the trays, the dinner and lunch trays, get it to them that way. You could write the letter and don't put no stamps on it. You don't, make it incorrect so they have to send it back. But the return to sender's name is the person you want to speak to. So you put their name up there. And when you drop it in, it will come back to them. Is there a name for that kind of letter where you don't put a stamp on it? We call it a boomerang letter. During the time that you were in the Bloodhound Brims, was anyone using P.O. boxes? Yes. Who? Showtime, Tisha. Who is Tisha? She was the GM of Bloodhound Brims at one point. What's a GM? A godmother. Miss Harney, could you please show the witness Government Exhibit 514A? Do you recognize that? Yes. What is it? That's Tisha. Okay. The government offers Exhibit 514A and 26C. Okay. Government Exhibit 514A and 26C are received in evidence. Mr. Morton, how were the P.O. boxes used? They was used to get money orders and get mail, or from jail. From jail? Yes. Were inmates in the New York State prison system allowed to write directly to each other? No. So, how would you write to another inmate in prison? Using them boomerang letters, or send a letter out to somebody, and then they'll, rewrite it, rewrite the envelope, and then send it back to the prison that you wanted to go to. When you were in jail, what kind of things would you write to other gang members, and what kind of things would they write to you? Who he was having beef with, or going to war with, who was in the whip, who was out of the whip. I'm sorry, who was in the whip? So if, for instance, for myself, they had wrote a letter saying I wasn't to be trusted. So they sent that letter out to another inmate. And, that's how you find out who can't get certain information, who can't be in the gang. I think you said the word whip, Mr. Morton. What is that? That's the organization. That's the Bloodhound Brims. Or any set. That's, the whip that you in. The whip is the name for a set? Yes. And I believe you said the word beef. What does that mean? Like your enemy, ones who you transgression against. Why was it important to know who the enemies were? Because you don't want to be in the yard and not know who's who. Not know who got problems with the gang and you in there. And then you end up getting cut because you didn't know that, they had beef with your gang. Within the Bloods, is there a name for an enemy? Yes. A plate. It'll be called a plate, or it's another word, but I can't remember it off the top of my head. Besides kites, what other kinds of communication would you have with your fellow gang members who were on the street when you were in prison? They come to visit me, or I'll call them. Have you personally sold drugs while inside the New York State prison system? Yes. What kinds of drugs? Heroin and weed, cigarettes. Have you helped other hounds get drugs to sell? Yes. How did you get the drugs? I got them from off the visit, or I would have somebody else go down on the visit and get it. What do you mean off the visit? So, if I was getting some heroin, they'll put it in a couple of balloons and wrap it up. Put it in a couple of what? balloons, like little water balloons. Balloons? Yes. Okay. So they'll put them in a couple of little water balloons, tie it, and I go down there and swallow it with some water and then bring it back, throw it up, and hand it out. Or some people, they would go down there for me. They would wrap theirs in a condom or something with some black tape, and they'll put the weed, cigarettes, razors inside of this. We call it a womb. And it would be about, whatever size. And they'll pass it off on a visit. And then the guy would take it and he'll insert it inside himself and bring it back. How would you be paid when you sold drugs in prison? Okay, so you could get paid for food from the commissary, or you have somebody like write a disbursement from out of jail, or you can do Western Union, where I would get on the phone with my people and say, I need you to Western Union $50 to whose ever name. And that's how you get paid.